Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me. It's different parts of the world. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning from the East Coast. My name is Surbhi Kaushik. I am a writer and a library volunteer. I'm also a literary artist, so I put together programs like this so that we can all have a nourishing and strong community to support our writing journeys. This morning and evening in Turkey, I'm getting ready to welcome Nafisa Haji, who is my guest today. Thank you, Nafisa, for joining us.
Thank you
And
for having
here,
me.
you're welcome. So here's her introduction. Nafisa Haji is an American of Indo-Pakistani descent. She was born and raised in Los Angeles and studied history at the University of California at Berkeley. She then taught elementary school in downtown Los Angeles for 7 years in a bilingual Spanish program and earned a doctorate in education from the University of California at Los Angeles. She speaks Spanish fluently. She is the author of two novels, The Writing on My Forehead and The Sweetness of Tears, and lives in Bodrum on the Aegean coast of Turkey. She is currently working on a divorce thriller titled The Judgment of King Solomon. Welcome, Nafisa, and it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love your introduction. I love the spirit of your group and your programs, especially Beyond Borders, as someone who has crossed them and lives beyond the borders where I come from, and it's ancestral. I always say my one heritage is immigration. So now I am an immigrant to another country myself. And no one in the past 4 generations in my family has been buried where they were born. So I'm going for broke. And so we've been in Turkey for 10 years now. Both my books were published while I was still living in the US. And I'm at the tail end of working on a third book. I just wanted, on that topic of borders, even intranational borders, to let you know that I have been to Charlotte, something I never would have thought I would have said, being, a bi-coastal person myself. I lived in Boston and I lived in California, which is where I was born. But summer of 2022, my son graduated from college, and it had been his lifelong dream to do a road trip with us. So we did. We came down the East Coast and went through the South. And Charlotte was one of our stops. And so we really enjoyed it. I have warm memories. It was just, we were doing one night and 2 nights in different towns, but it was so quaint. And my son is an enthusiast of public transport. So we took I guess it was light rail from one end to the other. And it was a really sweet town. I loved it. And we indeed loved the South in general. And that is the idea of beyond borders. Even within the United States, sometimes we get boxed in with our borders. So we have ideas of what California is like, and definitely as a Californian, I had ideas of what the South was like, and I was happily surprised. Every place we went, we loved it. So I brought up my son, and this will date me. My first book was published when he was a little boy, but having stopped teaching at that point, because I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. That's controversial in itself sometimes, but really I wanted to be a writer, and teaching is a job that is body, mind, and soul. So teaching and writing didn't go well together for me, because all of my thoughts when I would come home were about my students, and I taught elementary school. So I said, okay, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom and I'm going to write. Haha, that's funny too, right? As if that's not a full-time job. But that's how I started, during nap times and weekends, when my partner would give me the time to write. And what I did was related to the topic that I'm going to sort of focus in on. Since you are a group of writers, these are things that I was concerned about when I first started out. And I know from reading a lot of work from fellow writers who reach out and ask me to read that sometimes these can be sticky issues. The idea of subplots and how they relate to point of view and narrative voice, and how exactly do you tell multiple stories when you're telling one big story. That's what I wanted to tackle. So when I first started writing, it was just a series of exercises that I was giving myself. And I started off with a whole bunch of short stories that I knew I wanted to connect in some way in the beginning. From the beginning, I thought, okay, something will gel and I'll have the idea for a novel, a big overarching idea. But I did start with the small capsules of short stories and ended up with this unwieldy, massive collection that I knew I could connect somehow, but I didn't quite know how. But I figured out the narrative arc. Okay, there was going to be one narrative voice, and these stories were going to be little mini ventures within that person's experience. And as many of you may or may not already know, you're always eager, launch it out into the world. And I went and started querying when I had this still very unwieldy manuscript. I was fortunate enough to have a couple of agents be interested, but both of them were like, there's a lot of work to do on this. So I found the one that had resonated most in terms of her feedback, and I went back to the drawing board. It took a couple of years from getting an agent to feeling like we had a product that was, and that is what, unfortunately, it is a business sometimes, and the business of publishing. So it is a product. It's not something we like to think about when we start off writing, but unfortunately, that's the world we live in. A product that was ready to go out to market. So just that sounds painless. That is so painful when you have a bunch of things and then you cull. It is a process of culling, but it's not a bad thing in hindsight. It's always better to overwrite than to underwrite, because yes, you're going to be snipping a lot of things and things will end up on the floor, but those are things that you can put in a box and keep away for maybe another project or another idea that strikes. So it's never wasted. Overwriting is the way to go. So that was the first book. It was originally a bunch of short stories that got put into a novel and culled down quite a bit. I'm just making sure. So my first book was all first person narrative, one point of view, one voice, but there were subplots of stories that had happened. It was a family story. So that's relatively easy. And the way it's in terms of somebody remembering, that reminded me of this, that reminded me of that. And you can get into a subplot in a story based on hearsay, what that person remembers or is hearing from someone else, another character. So the point of view is still, it's pretty simple and straightforward. It's first person narrator in my case. And just to review a moment, those are terms I'm throwing around that sometimes can be very confusing. And this is where I have seen people get into trouble, even from my agent. This is something, a point of view versus narrative voice. And I'm assuming that there's some familiarity with what that means. But for example, first person singular, second person, third person, the omniscient narrator, which is not done as much anymore because it can become quite confusing to the reader. And so when you're writing, you're writing for yourself initially, but then you're also writing to communicate. And so one of the things I like to do is think of writing as an exercise in acting. So you're taking on the role of the voice that you're portraying. And so you're figuring out what is it that they would be privy to knowledge-wise? What is it that they wouldn't be privy to? Even if they're hearing a story from someone else, or if they're remembering from their own life, they would obviously have more extensive knowledge. So those terms are things I'm not gonna bore you with, but point of view, narrative voice, and focus are really easily confused with each other. And I know I'm probably reviewing, most of you are probably familiar with that, but it is good to have a clear idea of what those things are, so that if you're doing subplots, you can think about how they relate to your subplots. Because when I'm reading drafts of other people's work, that is something that trips people up in terms of, even if you're an omniscient narrator, what is it that you are conveying in terms of point of view? Voice is about the style. And I'll get to an example that I think is perfect for that in a bit. My second book The Sweetness of Tears was very different from the first. It didn't start off as a collection of short stories at all, but I did have an overall story in mind, and I wanted there to be different narrators and different voices in there. So all I did, it was very simple, was we've all read books like this, each chapter began with the name of the person telling that story. And so if there was an arc that I tried to follow throughout in linear fashion, it was usually they would pick up where the last person left off. So if someone came to visit and you saw that visit from one person's point of view, maybe the next chapter started with the person who was on the receiving end of the visit, just picking up. So time-wise, we were going linearly, but not in terms of perspective and focus. That was changing. So labeling the chapters with the name of the person who you're hearing from is an easy way to go in that sense. And the master of that, this is the example, if you haven't read Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible, that is an excellent example of one story being told by multiple voices. It's a group of sisters, and each sister has a distinct voice, a distinct point of view, and it's so distinct that after the first few chapters, you don't even need to read the name at the top to know who is talking, because she's so fully developed each voice. From what I understand, she actually wrote that story from each sister's point of view fully, and then culled it down. So it goes back to what I was saying in a circular fashion in terms of overwriting, writing too much, and then culling it down, paring it down, so that you're not telling the same parts of the story over and over again, but you can pick up the thread of, okay, this part of the story was told by this sister, and as a reader, you need to know that, but now you're familiar with the story, so the next voice can speak to the same story with a little bit less detail and just concentrate on their point of view or what they may have witnessed that was different from the other sister. So think of it as, we're all in a room together and something happens, and we all saw different angles, heard different things, and that makes for a very engaging way of tackling a subject or an event. So in my case, it was simple. It was the names, and I think she has the names at the beginning of the chapters, but hers is really fully developed in that the distinction in the voices was obvious, and you could see how much work she had done if she indeed had written the book from each sister's perspective. So that means I think there were 4 or 5 sisters in that. So she would have written the same novel 5 times and then put it together. So one of the things I always like to say is that language is math and music, and indulge me for a moment, because I've been living in a country with a notoriously difficult language to learn. Turkish is, and so this is something that I have thought about a lot. Language has a math component and a music component, the rhythm of language. And this, as I was thinking about today, I was thinking about it in terms of writing as well. Yes, the grammar and the punctuation obviously is the math and the formula part of it, the formulaic part of language. But then there's a musicality to it. And as writers, both of those things are crucial. The rules of language, of course, we can break them, but only if you already know them. We all know the difference between reading something from someone who doesn't know the rules. It doesn't feel right. It feels like they're coming from a place of not knowing, versus someone who's knows the rules and breaks them. That is something I've always aspired to do, to be a master of it, and then you can break the rules. So that is one side. Then the other side is the musical part of it. So when you're writing from different points of view, and that is what can become jarring, different points of view, different narrators, different voices, to make sure that there is a rhythm and a musicality. And so this is something I know as writers, you've heard a million times, but I really do read my work out loud to myself. If you haven't heard of that, oh, do always. It's something to that allows you to hear how it's striking the ear. It's a different experience of your own writing, of your own work. After you've done that once for yourself, if you feel silly doing it over and over again, find someone who's willing to let you read them your work. Mainly, whether they're paying attention to you or not is not the point. It's, again, to give yourself an excuse to read it again. It cannot be overemphasized how much I catch in terms of errors, in terms of what's not working language-wise, which I wouldn't do if I was just reading it with my eyes on the page. And it goes back again to how I like to see us ourselves, writers, as actors. We're acting out our what's going on in our head on the page. And so there is a parallel sort of between those roles, writing and acting. And it doesn't mean you have to be a good actor. I am not one. It just means that you're living out the experience, at least even if it's in one facet of the storytelling itself. So you, and it helps with voice, it helps with making sure you've got the point of view. When you hear yourself talking, you realize, wait, how could this character have known this or that? It's just so valuable a tool to read your work out to yourself. And it's something many writers say, but I really do it, always have, before I'd ever heard the advice from someone else. And I can't stress enough how important that is. So the book that I'm working on now is it has different timelines. So it's one voice, one narrator, one voice, but timelines. So this goes back to the idea of language and writing as the math part of it. I knew the story I wanted to tell. I had that written down, outlined, mainly because it is loosely based on a true story. So it wasn't that I had to come up with the story, but it was about how to tell it. And so I alternated chapters, and I did alternate. For me, I like the logic and the clarity, and I feel like it helps readers too, between talking about what was happening in the story at the time the narrator's talking about it and the past that had to explain it. So again, here comes formula. Sometimes, and there, nothing that I'm saying is what I believe to be a hard, fast rule. Everybody can come up with a unique way of telling a story. That's what we're doing basically, is telling stories. But I know that as a reader, I like the clarity of knowing what to expect and how that story is going to unfold. And so that helped me both ways. And so it meant having a lot of index cards and knowing, okay, these are the things from the past that I want to be in the story that are going to inform what is happening in the present.
Did we lose her for a bit? I'm wondering. You should be back. Hang in there, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, so she's going to join back. She's just left. Oh, there she is. Okay.
Sorry, I was worried about my internet in the new house. But anyway, so as I was saying, I knew I had almost two books running. And so how to braid them together became the challenge. And this is what I did, alternating. And so there was a lot of time spent staring at cards and figuring out which order to put things in, which wasn't necessary if you looked at just the stack of past and and present story. Oh, and when we got cut off, I was saying, Surabhi mentioned that the book I'm working on now is a divorce thriller. Well, obviously, to write about the divorce part, I also had to write about the marriage, because otherwise it's not really a story. So one of the threads was the marriage, and one of the threads was what was happening in a particularly nasty divorce. So, and the two, sometimes it went really well together, one chapter following the other, almost one informing the other, and sometimes it was a little trickier. And that is something that you have to sit there and ponder a lot. This isn't the writing part of writing. This is the math. This isn't the musical part of writing. It's the math part of figuring out how to weave these threads together. So I know this is a one-sided conversation. If I hope that what I said makes sense, great, and that it was helpful. I thought I would just talk about one exercise that I've done with writers before. I'm going to just talk about an artifact, say a handkerchief. And because I haven't finished unpacking, I actually have a handkerchief that I normally wave around and show everybody, but I don't. I can't find it. And this is worrisome because it actually has some history to it, both family history and current events and political history to it as well. Now I'm going to be deliberately mysterious, but just pretend this is a handkerchief, even though it's a Kleenex. Imagine a handkerchief. So think of all the different ways you could approach a story with that handkerchief as the focus. There is a famous Turkish writer, Orhan Pamuk. I don't know if you've heard of him. One of my favorite books of his is called My Name is Red. And in his, he breaks all the rules. Every chapter is a different narrator, a different point of view. One chapter I remember is a dog telling part of the story, and it was great. Another chapter is written by a corpse. Another chapter in terms of not written by, but narrated by. And so that handkerchief itself could become a protagonist of a story, or you could think of it in terms of the history of the handkerchief, who it belonged to, what it meant to them, who it was given to, where it was found, what it was used for. And you can start to see how that could be a love story. It could be a story of mother and daughter, or so many different ways of looking at it. So if you think of it as the protagonist, there could be multiple people that own that handkerchief, and that handkerchief knows them. What I'm doing is just giving you the handkerchief as an inspiration of trying to come up with a cohesive scene, and then another scene. So within that scene, how would you wrap, not to be all punny, but wrap that handkerchief around that story, that scene, where there's something inside of something, whether it's multiple characters or multiple events in the handkerchief's life. There's another example that is coming to mind. And this is a children's book called, oh goodness, it's Kate to Camillo, and it's Edward Tulane. Is it The Life's Journey of Edward Tulane? But it's a stuffed rabbit, and a toy rabbit, and it goes through a long life's journey. But there are plots within plots, and then following plots. So there is linear growth in terms of that object's lifetime and experience. And then there are subplots within it. So with that is not a living creature, but it becomes the means by which you learn about different children that it encounters, as well as phases in its life. So that would be an exercise, the handkerchief, the story of the handkerchief, or what the handkerchief has witnessed, or anything else. And I told Surabhi I'm happy for her to, especially for those of you who are joining live, to share any work that you come up with as an exercise. I'd be happy to read it and give you my feedback, and then maybe send you the actual story of my handkerchief that is lost right now, as an incentive, of what that story is, my personal story, which is also multi-layered. So I'd love to share it with you. You share your writing with me. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much, Nafisa. I mean, that's amazing, really, really enjoyable. I am going to open it to Q&A, but before that, we are going to take a group picture. If you're comfortable and able to come on camera, please do. I will be sharing this on social media. If you do not feel comfortable, you don't have to. But Josh is going to give us a count of three, and we hold our smiles. He clicks the picture for us.
Give people a second to turn on their cameras if they want. Okay. 1, 2, 3. And let me do it one more time just in case. 1, 2, 3. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Nafisa. Yeah, that was really helpful. This was what I wanted to talk about because The Sweetness of Tears, the book that I read and I like so much, has so many subplots and characters, and it's woven really well. I, as a reader, I find it really hard when the plot becomes nonlinear, but this one was done well. So thank you for sharing your personal journey of writing and all of the inputs. So I'm going to open it up to Q&A now. And you will not be able to unmute, but you can put it in the chat, and I'm going to read it out to her, and then she will answer your questions. And Nafisa, do you want to tell them which email they have to email their writing about the handkerchief to? We can put that in the chat.
Sure, sure. I'll
This
write
is
that
only
down.
for the live audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There it is, Nafisa Haji at hotmail.com. It's a little writing exercise. It's a first in Writers Beyond Borders. So thank you for that. Okay.
So
Okay.
go ahead.
Are you able to see the first question, or do you want me to read it out to you?
I can see it. Okay, that's a good one. So I think this is different from my second and third book. The question is, oh, yeah, should I read it? Did everybody looking at the chat box or? Okay,
I
so
can
how,
read it.
okay.
Yeah. How did the narrative arc make itself known for your first book, the collection of short stories you developed into a book?
Okay, so I had these short stories, and they were sort of like stories with a moral. And so the idea would be a maternal figure telling stories to teach her child lessons. That's how it began in my head, maybe because I was pregnant. So I was thinking about, how you pass on stories, and also because it was related to my mom. That was the way she often taught me things. Not always things I agreed with, but there were always sort of gossipy stories about family and this great aunt and their lesson. And so that was the one common theme, the idea of a story with a lesson. And so obviously there were very disparate lessons, not all of them, they weren't cohesive, but then eventually I realized, oh my gosh, I was really telling a story about a mother and at least one daughter. It ended up being two daughters. And the lessons that get handed down through generations, as well as the lessons mom had to learn along the way. And so then it became the family story. And so the narrative arc developed from the idea of mom telling daughters these stories, and that's how the book begins, with a tussle between two sisters, and one of the, I think, is a very common one: don't play with a pencil, or don't do this, you're gonna put an eye out. And then the story of that actually happened, and that was sort of the idea. And then the characters took shape, and then there comes a point in writing that I hope you've all experienced, where you're not writing anymore. The characters are writing for you, and they sort of take over the story. So that's the sweet spot. That's what we're all going for. It doesn't happen as often as I'd like it to, at least not for me. But when it happens, that's wonderful. So then the characters came alive. It was kind of backwards. And once I had the idea, the title came. The writing on my forehead, I've never consciously mentioned it in the book, but it actually has a cultural significance in many cultures in the East, which is destiny. So it's, India, Pakistan, the Arab world, further east, I've heard, also has the same idea, but it's automatically understood. In the book, it's a literally a reference to the mother writing words of prayer on her daughter's foreheads, So I hope that answered that. And yes, okay. I'll read the next one. I'm interested in knowing your publishing process, and how did you find an agent, or did you? So I mentioned in the beginning that I had this unwieldy manuscript of short stories that I had loosely connected and started querying out because I was ready. I mean, I was ready, so of course everybody should be ready for me. I was very fortunate in that my agent took a risk. It was really raw material, and so I did, and believe me, I must have sent out 40 or 50 query letters, but I did get a couple of responses, and then it was just a question of talking and seeing who understood the book, even as flawed as it was, better. This is a question that I just is sometimes can lead to a lot of anxiety, both in how you answer it and why it's being asked sometimes, because there is so much negativity out there for writers in terms of the impossibility of getting an agent and the impossibility of being published, and it can be so very demoralizing. And I there's little that I can say to assuage that, knowing the world we live in, but I do want to say the anxiety itself can become a debilitating factor in our writing. So I'm not sure that I can tell you what to do to keep the anxiety at bay, because I've had 2 books published. I'm sitting here waiting on my agent for the 3rd one as well. And there have been so many years that I'm almost like a first-time writer again myself. So I'm speaking from experience, both the first time and again, sort of, the question of so many years go by and you're a virgin again. The same thing with writing. So I just don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to people who are telling you it can't be done. I mean, I know statistically it can't be done for all of us, so there's that, but stay true and stay the course in terms of your writing. And we're living in an age where the anxiety is higher than ever, but we're also living in this age where, look at you all in different parts of the world, and I'm sitting here in Turkey, and we're talking about writing together, and there is a bigger community of readers connected than ever before. It's not about bestseller lists or how much money you make. At the end of the day, I don't know about you, but I just want to be read. And what is writing but a form of communication? So whichever way you find yourself being read, that is what matters. And it seems like many of you are much less shy and much less introverted than I am. And some of you who are introverts might be rolling your eyes, but the fact that you're reaching out and becoming involved in communities of writers and improving yourselves, you're already there. And so find communities that you can read your work out loud to, even if they're just pretending to listen. The publishing story is, it's anxiety inducing for all of us, but don't let that get in the way of your writing, because that's what matters. Okay. The next one is, how did you know when you were done with, oh, I lost it. With writing, there's something that can always be changed or improved. How did you know when your story was complete and ready for the world? I never really did get to the place where I knew I was done. There's that first eager thing, you've got the end. Now, 3 books later, I know that first time was me fooling myself. There is never a point when you're done. There is only a point where, if you're fortunate, it's been taken out of your hands and you can't fiddle with it anymore. Going back to the writing on my forehead and the sweetness of tears, I would probably change a million things now if I could, because I grow, you grow. So, as long as it's in your hands, your writing can grow with you. But there is a point at which, hopefully, it gets out of your hands and it's not yours anymore. It's just like being a parent. It's letting the kid out into the world, and now you're done. And you look back and say, oh my gosh, I should not have done co-sleeping, or I should have, had them in their own room. You're always second guessing yourself. So ultimately, it isn't, once it's out of your hands, then you're done. Until it's in your control, you're not. So that's the way I feel anyway. Okay, and agents are great, but if you don't have one, you can also send your work directly to, yep, absolutely. And that's not something I've ruled out for my future as well, because not all agents are great. But of course, the more advocates you have for your work, the less lonely the process feels. So, and at the same time, you do lose control, and you are answerable to someone in terms of making that into a product, as we talked about. It is a business. Okay. This one is, for me as a writer, finding the voice for a book has been key. Could you talk about your experience of that? I think that goes back to what I was talking about in terms of viewing yourself as an actor, telling a story. So, I mean, what's the difference here? There is a huge one, right? The actor is literally acting out, putting emotion and feeling into somebody else's words. So here, it's almost the opposite, right? You're putting the words, you're translating feelings into the words. You're the one who's delivering the words here. But if you read it out loud to yourself and think of it as a role that you're playing as you're writing, and when you read it out loud to yourself, that allows you to think about voice, or better yet, not think about voice and just become a voice as you're writing. So think about every conversation you have all the time. Think of the quirks of how someone speaks, whether they have meandering sentences or they're short and to the point. And thinking about voice in your daily interactions with other people will help you develop your own. And this is something else that I should have said earlier. You're all writers. You're all connected with a library. So you're all readers too. And that is another way of exploring your voice. Really dissect the books you read, not just for pleasure, read them also looking at how distinct each character is from the other in terms of what they're saying, what authors are doing in the books you're reading to give a flavor. So those people are coming alive in your head as distinct from each other. So we all have a voice in our real life, and that's one way of thinking about it, of just using the people around you to research. That's one thing writers, we do. Okay. You mentioned overwriting. Do you have another editing process other than reading your work aloud that helped you make the work more concise? Well, I think the combination of both of those things, the reading my work to myself and that idea of index cards, or however you're laying out the story so you can look at the big arc. The thing about writing a book and why it becomes so daunting for me, as well as writers in general, is it is so big, right? It's one thing to write a scene or a short story, but by the time you're midway through, you can almost forget what you started with. This is where a lot of tripping up happens, where you, they had 3 ear piercings in chapter 1, and now, so this is annoying, and this just may be me, with a touch of being, anal, but I do reread my work over and over again, even when I'm not doing it aloud. So aside from every day starting off reading the prior day's work, so that I'm sure that I'm picking up where I left off, it's just going back to chapter 1. It's one of the reasons the first half of my books are always really well edited. This doesn't work for everybody, though. You can get bogged down in the details of trying to perfect everything as you're writing. Many other writers are all about getting that first draft out of the way, and then starting a second draft over again. For me, I can't fight with my nature. I do meticulously go over everything over and over again. And it also makes me feel good about my writing usually. And if I'm not feeling good about what I've written, then I know there's something I need to address. So reading it over and over and over and over and over again for me is the other technique for editing. It's surprising, you can read something 50,000 times and then suddenly find a typo that you never saw. So that's one of the things that helps me with editing. And going back, while we're waiting, if anybody else has a question, something I didn't mention that I wanted to, when someone, I had a friend read the first draft of my novel when it was really unwieldy, and when it got before it got called down to be a product. And she mourned the loss of a lot of the things that I ended up cutting. And the way she put it was, I thought of it as like a desktop on a computer with different windows and tabs open, and I really liked it. This may be a generational thing, because she was younger, so I would never have thought of it that way, although now I do, thanks to her opening my eyes to it. And that's a good analogy, but just think of how good you feel when you've cleaned up your desktop. That is part of the process of editing and subplots. You want to make sure that you have a tidy desktop. You can have multiple tabs open, but they should be the tabs you're using and not tabs that you forgot to close from 3 years ago. And that Windows analogy works in terms of culling, as well as, okay, I have a subplot going here and another one here, and as long as it's working and it's cohesive and it's not overwhelming, because if it's overwhelming to you, then it's definitely going to be overwhelming to your reader. Okay. Okay, this one's good. How do you develop a critical eye? They were all good. A critical eye for editing that doesn't degenerate into self-flagellation. Well, it depends on how much coffee I've had that day and how I'm feeling in general. And if you get into self-flagellation mode, which happens to me for sure, go for a walk. Remind yourself that presumably the reason that you are a writer is because there is a part of you that feels good about the way you express yourself. Somewhere, someone has told you that you have the ability to convey things with words cohesively. So remind yourself of those episodes, go back and read a story that you've written, that you liked, that you felt good about. If you're in extreme self-flagellation mode, just get away from the writing for a bit, because then you're going to you'll read stuff that you knew was good and you'll still feel bad about it. It's just, that is not an analogy for writing. That is for being human. When we're feeling good, we're feeling good. And when we're feeling bad, everything is bad. Maybe I'm just sharing too much about myself. So, okay. Let's see.
And I think my question is the next one, and that is,
Okay.
I'm going to wrap it up after this just because we're close to time.
Okay.
But I want to tell you all that in case you have more questions, the email that she has shared, she's already told us she's happy to hear from you all via email, and you can ask whatever questions you want through her, and she's happy to answer. Yes.
Yeah, just give me some time, because I'm not the best at responding, but I will respond. So last question then, Surabhi, is from you. How do you handle transition in the plot, especially with the back and forth in the timeline. So the back and forth in the timeline for the book that I'm working on now, as I said, was straight and clean and concise. Maybe this is the wannabe mathematician, don't have the math skills, but you know, the idea of the formula. So where I literally alternated chapters just to keep my head clear as well as help the reader along. Some transitions happen within one chapter, and whether it's a flashback or, you know, looking back, it's just the way a conversation goes. You know, you could be sitting and having coffee with a friend and you're talking about the weather, and then it goes, you know, somehow the conversation takes a turn. Emulating natural language as much as possible is how it keeps it from feeling artificial. I say that after having explained that there's an artificiality in terms of the way I sometimes alternate in chunks, in chapters. So it's a question of balancing the two. And I think the subplot where it's one person's voice can happen very easily within a chapter, within a chunk of the story. Another way of thinking about writing in general is think about it in terms of scenes, the way that scenes unfold in our lives. So when you think about it in terms of scenes, you want to think about, how would I transition? How would I get from this scene to the next? So two friends are having coffee, and then one of them goes into a childhood memory of trauma, for example. So how would that happen in real life? That conversation would unfold, whether it's the person just thinking about it, staring off into the distance, you know. So some action that links you from that one scene to the next. And if it's a subplot, if it's a scene that's going to unfold in the imagination of one of the people, one friend leaves the coffee shop, the other one thinks about what a nice time that was with their friend, but something about the you know, something that will link you into the transition. So you literally, it's like you're telling a story, but you're holding the hand of your reader as well. So you want to make sure you're giving the guidance and sort of walking them with you rather than leaving them behind.
Thank you so much, Nafisa, and all of you guys for joining us from different parts of the world. This is awesome. I'm so glad to be back with Writers Beyond Borders. If you've registered through the library for this program, you will get the link for the next program, which is on 21st February, same time. And I'm going to have a publicist talk about how it is to promote your book. Okay, he's going to talk about it. That's a great topic as well. And if you haven't and you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm going to say bye to you all. Thank you so much. Please read Nafisa's books. If you are in Charlotte, it's available in the public library. One is an ebook, the other one is a physical copy and an audiobook. So the links of all of that will be there in the thank you email. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.